Welcome to ShiftWatch. I'm your host, Starbuck. In this episode, today's lead story is quite different in that it highlights the current solar conditions reawakening, with considerable flaring resuming on the Earth-facing side of the sun. Buckle up for some elevated geostorm activity over the next few days, with these events coming at us sequentially. Next, we hear so much news these days about the sun's effect on our planet and how science shows us this phenomenon is growing. So, in an attempt to pull us all on the same page, here's Ben Davidson from Space Weather News explaining what events referred to as sunspots, solar flares, coronal hole wind streams, and coronal mass ejections are, along with the sources we use to make these determinations. Then, as you've seen over the last few episodes, I've found a few more reliable sources of current auroral activity that I'll share. These happen to be from a place outside Fairbanks, Alaska. I know we're all mesmerized by the beauty of these scenes, but do you realize, dear human, that this indicates a massive amount of solar plasma from the sun that Earth is being pummeled with? And finally, Ascension is Not What You Think is the title on this little mystery school segment from Spirit Science that illustrates the rising vibrations that more individuals are claiming to begin to sense.
And so it begins. Good morning, folks. Welcome, observers. Today we're going to hit a couple science stories at the end, but our top focus is the sun once again. If you paid attention yesterday, we've got a rapidly deteriorating situation. The whole, well, that escalated quickly meme born from Anchorman comes to mind actually because the solar killshot risk has gone above the 1% mark. That means I'm on 24-hour alert until the event is over. You are watching yesterday's X-class solar flares and CMEs, and they were additive to what we already had on our way, a combination of a CME and coronal hole stream. Big dark opening there, isn't it? The combo was due to hit Thursday, tomorrow. That's still on deck. And I think the first eruption yesterday might merge. Maybe even the second, but that is more likely to arrive on Friday. The bigger story, of course, is we've got 4 small events coming our way. And just this morning, as I was putting the show together, another flare, M7. We'll wait and see if this produced a CME. It'll be a few hours before we know that and which way it's heading. But if it's heading this way, that would be the 5th event in the sequence of impacts slated to begin tomorrow evening. Right now, we'll call it 4, with the understanding that I may be back here later today updating that number, but again, for now, we're going with this. And given the eruptions on their way, 4 total shock events and likely more coming, we are above the 1% risk level of a solar kill shot. If all the magnetism is south-facing, these 4 could have the cumulative impact energy of an X10 or X11 flare and CME event. Let's hope for favorable magnetism of this event over the next couple days, especially since there is really no rational basis for thinking the sun is done. These sunspots are gnarly, and they are still morphing around quite a bit, with significant umbral complexity in the flaring zone. And while that turns to face Earth, yesterday's second X-class flare at the limb tells us there is more coming. You just can't see it yet. Going to be an exciting space weather time for several days here, folks. Eyes open. For SOOGs who have been around since the cosmology days, yep, they're still looking for dark matter and dark energy, but here they are also adding to the suggestions that it's not what they thought it was. Einstein got that one wrong in the cosmological constant. Excellent read. Link below. And here, a fascinating bit on the spreading rift in the Gulf of California. Have to say, I love that I'm still learning stuff after more than 100,000 papers. The rift that runs along the waterway and up towards San Diego is trying to tear apart. It has been unable to get over the edge thus far, and this team is looking at how when it breaks it could trigger a full continental breakup. What is space weather? Space weather is the study of how the space environment is impacted by activity on the sun and how those conditions then impact the Earth. This includes sunspots, solar flares, solar wind, coronal mass ejections, coronal holes, geomagnetic storms, and more. The closest most regular people get to space weather is hearing about the northern lights. Maybe they see them, the aurora. Some know it has to do with the sun and solar activity, but the details are elusive for those who don't dig deeper. So, let's pick up the shovel, shall we? The place to begin is with sunspots. These are highly magnetic areas on the surface of the sun. It's called the photosphere, and they are where the majority of space weather awareness begins. They can be tiny, up to bigger than Jupiter, and there are often many in one location. The appearance of sunspots runs on an 11-year cycle, sunspot maximum and sunspot minimum. Virtually no sunspots appear during the minimum, while lots appear during the maximum phase. How many appear during that maximum phase always varies, as you can see here in the amplitude variability over the last few centuries of observations, but the 11-year cycle does not change. That would be the wavelength of the pattern. These sunspots are the makers of the most exciting space weather phenomenon, the solar flare. We need to understand why these sunspots make solar flares. These sunspots are not simply surface features, but their effect goes high into the solar atmosphere, called the corona. There are large arching magnetic fields filled with plasma connecting positive and negatively charged sunspots, like a circuit. And when those fields interact at this area between the photosphere and the corona, called the chromosphere, there is brightly excited plasma visible in many of the sun's ultraviolet images. The interaction of those magnetic field arches is the most common cause of the solar flare. Since sunspots are constantly growing or shrinking and moving around in relation to one another, these arching fields have a tendency to interact. And when that happens, the highly energetic fields and electric plasma under the power of the star electromagnetically explode. By far, the most powerful events seem to follow a very specific pattern. There is a smaller release, and that smaller release causes a rapid growth of new and powerful fields, which grow too quickly, rise too quickly, allowing the arch to interact with itself and cause an explosive disruption of the circuit. These solar flares appear as bright flashes in the ultraviolet images, and this is the release of not only extreme ultraviolet light, but X-rays as well. These X-rays are actually the way we classify a solar flare, by how much X-ray energy is released in the wake of that electromagnetic explosion of the arching magnetic fields from sunspots. The scale rating, from lowest to highest, is A-class flare, B-class flare, C-class, M-class, and X-class is the largest. These flares can be further classified into two types, impulsive or short-duration flares and long-duration flares. The long-duration ones tend to be more explosive, and here on the X-ray flux chart from the GOES satellite, we can see a few impulsive C-class flares and then a long-duration M-class flare. When I say the long-duration flares are more explosive, this is what I mean. They produce coronal mass ejections, CMEs, plasma mass ejected from the corona and out into space. While solar flares ionize the upper atmosphere of Earth, it is the CMEs that actually deliver the electromagnetic punch to our planet. These can occur not only due to solar flares, but due to plasma filament eruptions. Large, thin, cloud-like structures high in the corona are also quite prevalent, and they can erupt as well. Both long-duration flares and the plasma filament releases can cause CMEs, and those CMEs enhance the solar wind. The solar wind is a constant plasma stream away from the sun, outward in all directions, happening all the time. But the CMEs enhance that plasma stream, delivering far more electromagnetic energy as they do so. This is not only what triggers those auroral events, but can also wreak havoc on our technology, from satellites to power grids and everything in between, if they are big enough. There is one more thing that can enhance the solar wind, and that is a coronal hole. They appear dark in the solar ultraviolet images, but they aren't holes that look down into the sun. They are simply empty areas in the corona, ergo the name coronal holes. They are empty because while most of the solar plasma is fairly well contained in even larger arcs than the ones connecting sunspots, called coronal magnetic fields. Coronal holes, however, have fields that stretch out into space, allowing that solar wind plasma to blast out more powerfully. For this reason, they are the third way we get enhanced solar wind. Again, those three are big solar flares,
plasma filament releases, and coronal holes. All enhance the solar wind that impacts the Earth. Solar wind is monitored at all times by several different satellites. From top to the bottom, looking at the solar wind data, we see the measurements of the magnetic field strength embedded within the plasma stream, then the magnetic angle of the field in blue, then solar wind density in the middle, plasma speed of the stream second from the bottom, and finally plasma temperature in green down below. The solar wind shows very different characteristics when you're looking at a CME versus a coronal hole stream. In this data, you can see how there is a jump in the telemetry factors all at the same time. That is the impact of a CME. However, a coronal hole stream doesn't change all the telemetry at once. These begin with the rise in density, and it is followed by a rise in plasma speed and temperature. This is because instead of a CME shockwave, a coronal hole stream is simply a faster stream in the solar wind that acts like a shovel through snow, piling up the density on the leading edge, and after that initial density bulge like snow on the shovel blade, the faster coronal hole stream particles arrive. Did you know that we can generally predict whether or not a sunspot group will erupt solar flares? In addition to visualization of the active region sunspots, their magnetism is seen by neutral iron characteristics in something called a magnetogram instrument on satellites. An alpha-class sunspot is dominated by one polarity, either red negative or blue positive, and they are least likely to erupt. Beta class have both polarities, and generally that classification is needed to get any kind of significant solar flare. Further enhancements are gamma and delta class. Gamma class is when you cannot separate the positive and negative sectors with a continuous line, when one is cut off from the rest of its like polarity spots. Here, in the middle, the blue positive spots cut the red spots into two groups, making it gamma class. And finally, delta class is when you get positive and negative closely interacting, basically bumping into one another. That's where you get the highest of all chance of bigger flares. Once a solar flare, or plasma filament, releases a CME, we can begin to diagnose its density, speed, and direction via the Soho-Lasco coronagraphs. The CMEs are very easy to see on these images and their direction of motion as well. The way you can tell if it's coming our way is by seeing what's called a halo eruption. When you see it going out to just one side, you can be pretty sure it's not aimed at Earth, which is the case for all of these shown here except for the bottom right corner. That one looks like a ring around the sun, and when that happens, we call it a halo eruption, and it is going to impact the Earth. So let's review some of this stuff using the March 2012 solar flare event. The sunspot that came through was very large and complex. It did have the magnetic complexity and the beta gamma delta class range. As it extended its arching magnetic fields, it had the type of interaction we discussed, causing a series of solar flares, one of which was very long duration and released a CME that's easily visible by the disruption in the corona around the flare point. The Lasco coronagraph showed a halo eruption heading out in all directions, indicating that it would hit the Earth, and indeed it did, triggering geomagnetic storm activity over several days, which can be most easily seen by the KP index charts. Aurora were seen down to mid-latitudes, the SkyTerra satellite station was crippled and lost, and there was a 10x increase in cellular disruption, flight delays, and electrical fires reported in the United States and Europe. As most of our regular viewers know, the Sun releases a super flare event every 150 to 200 years, one big enough to cripple the entire world's electrical capabilities. The last one in 1859 was before there was much to destroy. That was 164 years ago, and so we're in the red zone for the next one, which is why it is now more important than ever to monitor the Sun. Estimates range from 60 to 90% of humanity will perish when we lose global power, since critical systems from water treatment and distribution to heating to hospital functions and transportation sectors would be disabled with nobody coming to rebuild, since it has impacted everyone at the same time. So if you see the power go out and there's no thunderstorms and your cell phone doesn't work and the sky lights up with aurora, you can bet it was the Sun. We're 164 years since the last great event of this 150 to 200 year cycle, so many of us are likely to see the next one in our lifetimes. We report on the Sun's activity every single day, right here. Eyes open, no fear. Be safe, everyone.
Hey everyone! Today we're going to be looking at a series of insights from a book called The Celestine Prophecy by author James Redfield. I'm sure many of you have heard of it, if not read it, or perhaps you've seen the movie. The book itself chronicles a man who goes to Peru where he learns about an ancient manuscript that was recently discovered, which shares insights about the process of waking up to a higher consciousness and understanding yourself better. We thought that the book shared very valuable insights for people growing spiritually and consciously, and we'd like to share it with you today. We do recommend checking out this book if you have time, as well as James' other work. But for those of you who don't have the time, here's the abridged version.
The first insight. The first insight reveals that there is a mysterious way in which your life evolves. It talks about how there is something more, something spiritual, operating underneath everything we do. It encourages one to look at their life in a new way, taking the coincidences in their experiences seriously. People are realizing that these meaningful coincidences in their life are not coincidences at all, but synchronistic events, and following them will start you on your path to spiritual truth.
The second insight. The second insight reveals that we are all in the process of constructing a new perception of the world that we live in. The first half of the millennium was controlled by the church, which interpreted spirituality for the people, passed down doctrine, restricted our beliefs, and controlled the avenues of power. It put one in a specific place within society, and humankind at the center of the universe in a battle of good and evil. These beliefs gave meaning to life, but they were challenged during the Renaissance and Reformation. From there, humans took to science to discover the meaning of life. Of course, science wasn't able to figure it out right off the bat, so in the meantime, we turned our attention to increasing material comfort while our adventurers and scientists searched for the meaning of life. Now, as we start a new century, we have lost touch with all meaning to life, but have achieved the material comfort that we sought after. People are beginning to wake up and realize the state of the world, and we're beginning to look inward at ourselves. It's time for us to reconnect with life's ultimate purpose.
The third insight. The third insight begins a new view of life. It describes a new understanding of the universe as being made entirely of energy, and not only that, but an energy that responds to how we think. This energy is malleable to human intention and expectation, can be consciously caused to flow out into the world and affect other energy systems. Interactions between energy systems, including humans, involves a blending, depletion, or absorption of energy. The insight teaches how to observe this energy through an enhanced, heightened sensitivity to beauty. Beauty is on the same wavelength as this invisible energy, and by being in tune to the beauty in nature or even in others, we can begin to tune into the energy fields. The insight talks about perceiving auras in a specific way, as seeing energy fields around individuals or nature in certain colors. I want to point out that not everyone will see auras and energy fields in the same way. Some will feel into them, feel what others are emitting by being around them. Some people will see them, but not everyone will see colors either. You might just see a white glow, or you could even see a swirly field, or nothing at all. Remember that everything is frequency, and ultimately, it will depend on what frequency you are picking up and tuning into. Only a small part of the electromagnetic spectrum is the colorful aura that is described in the third insight.
The fourth insight. The fourth insight points out that we as humans have been unconsciously competing for this particular energy that flows between people. We draw it from each other and protect ourselves from others attempting to draw it from us. This can lead to some nasty interactions in which we humans will age each other in the competition for energy.
The fifth insight! This insight reveals that competition for energy is unnecessary because subtle energy exists in abundance. You can draw in energy from the infinite universe and fill yourself up with a sense of love. When we give our love to something, we create an energetic current that energizes ourselves as well as the object of our love. A quote from the book best describes this as, "Love is not an intellectual concept or moral imperative or anything else. It is a background emotion that exists when one is connected to the energy available in the universe, which of course is the energy of God. Being in love is the most hedonistic thing you can do."
The sixth insight. In order to be in a state of love with the world, we have to let go of old patterns of behavior we developed to take energy from others. These are called control dramas, which we can clear by simply being conscious of them and realizing the higher truth behind our control drama fantasy. There are 4 control dramas. 2 are actively demanding energy, and 2 are passively creating conditions in which energy is sent. Active control dramas include intimidation and interrogation, asking questions and then picking apart the answers. Passive control dramas include aloofness, creating an air of mystery that entices others to send energy, and the poor me control drama, creating a sense that if others don't provide energy, something awful will happen to the individual. In realizing our control drama, it exposes the true self which energizes our lives by showing us who we are, the path we are on, and what we're doing here. Second, we have to clear out our control dramas. We must understand our parents' control dramas and how they shaped ours. Then, we must learn the meanings that our parents' lives had for us and how this determines our own developmental work. The energy conflict between our parents and us becomes a series of lessons to show us the silver lining that lies beyond the energy conflict. From here, you'll become a synthesis of your mother and father's unconscious teaching without any negative emotions in the way.
The seventh insight! Once you are cleared of traumas, you can build energy through contemplation and meditation. Focus on the basic life question and start writing a steady stream of intuition, dreams, and synchronistic coincidences, all guiding you in the direction of your evolution and transformation. Center yourself on your life path by discovering the immediate, smaller questions that currently confront you in life. These questions always pertain to the larger question and define where you currently are on your lifelong quest.
The eighth insight. This insight tells us that we can aid others as they bring us the answers we seek. It describes a whole new ethic on how people should treat each other in order to facilitate everyone's evolution. In relating to others, it points out that children can be raised without control dramas if they have a constant, undivided access to an adult who can give them the energy they need. Evolution can't be done alone, so begin to practice this new ethic by uplifting those who cross your path. Talk to people who you meet coincidentally or make spontaneous eye contact with. You and them each have a message or learning that helps bring you up to a higher awareness of your lives. Everyone who we meet has a message for us. The Celestine prophecy also discusses relationships. Avoid codependent relationships, which involves an addiction to other people. This subtle energy has a male and female side. In many cases, a couple will lock into each other's energies and fall madly in love. But if their focus stays tethered to each other, they're not tuned to the infinite energy of the universe. They eventually begin to compete with each other for energy. This restarts the control dramas. This is the falling in love and out of love phenomenon. This prophecy calls for people to be whole before connecting with another. Connecting with another in this way, together you will create a super person.
The ninth insight. The ninth and final insight is about conscious evolution. Humans consciously participate in their evolution by living according to their intuition, which guides them in such a way as to increase their energy. Our technology will do more of our work for us and allow us to focus on our own spiritual growth. In doing so, we can increase our bodily vibration to a level much higher than the dimension of this current plane, and consciously move into a higher frequency or dimension of our universe. In doing so, we would literally disappear from the visible perception of many people in this lower frequency, just as Jesus and other high energy people have done throughout time. The more beauty we can see, the more we evolve. The more we evolve, the higher we vibrate. Ultimately, our increased perception and vibration will open us up to a heaven that is already before us. We just can't see it yet. At some point, everyone will vibrate highly enough so that we can walk into heaven in our same form. And that's badass.